Hello everyone and welcome to Live with Janome. I'm Miriam Coffey and today I'm really excited to talk to you guys about Stabilizer. Now I wanted to talk to you guys about Stabilizer for a couple reasons. First is that Janome has a software program called the Artistic Digitizer and we are doing a special promotion with the program now until the end of the month where you can try out the software for free, and all you have to do is go to our website and fill out a little form, and we're going to give you a code, and that way you'll be able to test out the software. If you are interested in learning how to digitize, now is the time to kind of get your feet a little wet before you fully commit. So if you are interested, I highly recommend you giving that a try. A little bit about the program. There is tons of information out there. Ann Heim is our education software specialist, and she does videos every week, and plus she's been doing them for the last handful of years, so there's a whole backlog, so there is really nothing that she hasn't touched. There is so much information, plus there's a Facebook community page as well as videos on the software itself to help you learn the program. So with that, I thought it was kind of timely to talk about Stabilizer. Plus it's a topic that can be a little, it's kind of basic at first, but then once you kind of dig into it, it can be a little overwhelming. So I'm hopefully going to try to help you out with some of those questions that you might have with Stabilizer. So let's go ahead and get started. And what I want to start with is something that I recommend when you're starting with embroidery. Even if you've been embroidering for a while and you don't have one, I highly recommend you getting a sample, a couple of them, or one or two, whatever brand you like. I personally don't have a particular brand that I use all the time. I have probably a half a dozen different brands that I use, and some of them I like more than others for certain things. So I do recommend getting a Stabilizer sample pack, because they have, especially the ones that have the physical pieces or samples of the Stabilizer. It also gives you the description of what it is, kind of a quick reference. Sophie does the same. One of the reasons why I highly recommend getting one of these or a couple of them is because we're all kind of tactile people in the textile world. You know, we make quilts, we're dealing with fabric, we're kind of hands-on, and you can read a description of a Stabilizer online, but you know, what does a medium tearaway Stabilizer feel like? And if you find it on the list, then you'll be able to feel it and be like, okay, this is what I feel, okay, this is what I need, or I need a little bit lighter, a little bit heavier, whichever. So having physical pieces of them can be really, really nice. Plus it gives you, you may not realize there's a Stabilizer out there for you for a particular project that you weren't aware of, because it's not a, you know, day-to-day tearaway or cutaway. There are a lot of specialties, and some brands have more specialty ones than others. So I encourage you to kind of check them out and see which ones you like and what will work best for the projects that you're working on. So that being said, let's put this aside. And with the Stabilizers, there are three main types of Stabilizer. We have Tearaway, Cutaway, and Washaway. And then there's also sort of specialty Stabilizers. There's also Stabilizers that kind of are a little bit of both. Some are Tearaway and Washaway. So there are a variety of different types, but the three basic ones are the tear, cut, and wash. So let's start with Tearaway. So Tearaway is kind of one of the most, kind of like the most used, at least it's one of the most used that I use. And this is just an example of sort of a basic medium weight Stabilizer that tears away. And it's just really easy to tear. And they come in different sizes. You can get rolls, and they also come in sheets. Different brands are going to have the availability of sheets, some more than others. There's less sizes of them, so sometimes you do waste a little bit more with the sheets, but they can be very convenient if it is a size that you use all the time and a Stabilizer that you use all the time. I do recommend getting the sheets because it is really nice just to be able to pull a sheet out. But if it's but not all of them come with in that in a pre-cut sort of situation. Most of them are in rolls, and you can get different sizes within the rolls, and those sizes kind of vary with the brand, but they're sort of mostly in relation to the most popular size hoops. There is also one of my favorite types of tearaways. This is a more fibrous tearaway. It kind of feels more like paper and less, it's softer, and I think it's a little bit easier to tear. You might be able to see you can see there's like little fiberies stuff there, and it makes it really easy to tear away. I do also keep my scraps, not all of them, but ones kind of around this size I have a tendency of keeping. I have a whole little drawer of all of my scraps, so don't worry about having extra stabilizer around it because it has served its purpose. I know there are some people that get really scared about wasting any sort of stabilizer, but you do need enough stabilizer that you can comfortably hoop your project without having to have this like a tiny 1/4 inch, because then it could slip and then you're gonna have to waste even more because you'll have to start over. So don't be too stingy with the amount of stabilizer you use, because remember that it is serving its purpose by just hooping it. If there's a little bit of waste around the side, that is what it's meant for. It's meant to hold that up. And there are lots of things that you can use the scraps for. Like I cut them in these sort of longer strips, and then sometimes I will subcut them. They work really great for decorative stitches, or if you have the CM17 that has the mirage stitches, this works really great because it does need a stabilizer. Having this to stitch on, and then I can just cut it to whatever size I need and then tear it away. And it tears away from my stitches sometimes a lot easier than the this type over here that is a little it's just a little rougher feeling, and it isn't quite as easy. It doesn't tear quite as easily. For more detailed stuff, I think this is really nice, and it's a little bit softer. And there are a couple different brands that make this type. This particular one is from Marathon, but there are several brands that make this type of more fibrous tearaway stabilizer. So, and anytime you're working with tearaway, so this is just a little stitch out, you want to kind of support your stitches when you're tearing it out. You just don't want to willy-nilly just rip, because you could very easily disturb the stitches. So I always like to start in one spot and kind of hold it with my thumb and just kind of tear away. And then it is actually quite easy to tear away, and then I could just pull the rest of it. But it's a really easy way of working with and getting rid of stabilizer versus having to cut it away. There is also stabilizer that is tearaway stabilizer that is sticky. So this is an example of a sticky tearaway stabilizer. Any sticky stabilizer is going to be paper backed, and you're going to feel the little plasticky paper part, and then you're going to have the tear away part on the back here. And I'm going to just quickly show you how to hoop this up, because it is a little bit different than just regular stabilizer. So you have our hoop. So this is my SQ10B hoop. Now this is my piece of stabilizer, and this is my shiny paper back, and then this is my sticky tearaway right here. I'm going to hoop this with the shiny paper side up. So I'm going to place it just like this, and then make sure that my hoop, because our hoops have a right or left on it, you want to make sure that you push down evenly. And because the paper stabilizer is a little bit bulkier, you may need to loosen up your hoop a bit. And if you're working with a really big hoop, you may have to kind of hoop it twice and kind of get an impression of it, because sometimes it will pop out. But once you kind of get that memory, hooping it again is really easy. And then on this particular hoop, I just lock it into place. So now I have my the stabilizer on the back, the shiny paper on the front, and then I just take a pin or a sharp object And I normally like to make an X, and then I go around the perimeter of the hoop, and then use the tip to peel it back, exposing the stabilizer. And then I can just do that all the way around the hoop. And for something this small, you wouldn't necessarily have to do a whole X, but if I'm working with a really big hoop, sometimes that X can be make it a little bit easier to peel it up. So now I have a sticky surface that I could then put my project on top of. So why would you necessarily use a sticky stabilizer? You want to use a sticky stabilizer anytime you're working with a piece of fabric or material or garment that cannot be hooped. So let's say this vinyl or vegan leather little zipper pouch that I made, and I used a sticky stabilizer to attach my fabric onto my hoop because I can't hoop this because it would be too thick. Same thing with like a denim jacket. You can't hoop a whole jacket. So by putting your stabilizer and then putting your garment or your project on top of that, you then keep that fabric secure, and it's not going to move, and it's going to keep it from getting all wonky. So sticky stabilizer is a really beneficial tool in embroidery because it really keeps things from shifting. It's really good for any sort of knit or things that are shift their fibers a lot. So when I'm doing a, let's say, embroidered cardigan, I will stabilize it first because it will keep it from getting distorted and then having some sort of wonky, project or embroidery that I have on any sort of garment, and then it would be ruined, and then you'd have to, start over. So this is sticky stabilizer, and this comes in the Tearaway, and it does also come in some other ones as well. There are even some examples of, this is a Tearaway Washaway fusible, so it has a little bit of everything. Now it's fusible, so in case it's something that you don't want sticky, you can iron the stabilizer to your project, and again, it will stabilize everything. And it's Washaway and Tearaway. So what that means is, and there are several brands that make this. This one particularly is a Floriani one, and what this does is it does tear, so I can tear this, and it is also that sort of fibrous material. Now, some of the fibers are actually Washaway, and some of them are actually just regular Tearaway. And so when you wash it, all of the Washaway parts will go away, and the regular Tearaway will stay in and secure the embroidery. It is not something that you're going to use with a really super dense project, like, a bulletproof embroidery that has tons and tons of stitches. But for, medium to lightweight embroidery designs or stitch count, this is really great. For things that you want to soften up over time, this is really nice. And it kind of gets rid of sometimes that extra bulk that can happen. So that's a really fun way. And let's go ahead and move on to Cutaway. So in Cutaway, there's kind of two main types. And first off, we're going to start off with this mesh kind. So this is a Cutaway mesh. It is transparent, and it feels it's plasticky sort of feel, but it is soft. So this is something that you can use on a garment if you are going to be wearing it and you don't want a scratchy embroidery, some stabilizer on it that can get really scratchy. This is really soft, and it moves. You can see how malleable that is. It's not stiff. Like this is a little, like that's a little stiffer. You can see how it kind of keeps its shape, but this is way more malleable. So it's really nice for garments because it is going to keep that stability of your project, of the design itself, but keep that movement and that flexibility, and it's not going to be, scratchy on your skin. So, and again, several brands make this. This is more the meshy kind. And it's some of the brands come in the white. I've also seen it in black, and I've also seen it in like kind of a nudie beige color for certain projects. But other than that, it's not, most stabilizers are really only going to be white, but some of them do come in black or occasionally a beige. There is also, lastly, this Cutaway that is a little more kind of, it just kind of feels like a really sturdy tearaway slash, let's see, it's kind of like a combination of the tearaway and the fibrous, but like it's a little sturdier. Cutaways are really great for really dense designs or dense projects. And again, they come in different weights. There are heavyweight cutaways, lighter weight cutaways, same with the tearaways that come in different weights. So it is good to be able to feel them in person, to be able to know what kind of how it feels, so you know whether or not it will work for your project or not. So let's switch to Washaway because there are a lot within the Washaway categories. I use Washaways a lot. There are a couple different kinds. So there's this kind that also looks very similar to the Cutaway that is here. They look very similar. And because sometimes stabilizers can look kind of similar, and their packaging, all of the descriptors are on it, saran wrapped around the roll, and it can be really easy to mistake some of the stabilizers because they can kind of look alike. So one thing that I like to do is when I take the plastic off, get rid of the plastic, but I keep the paper description and I keep it in the roll itself so that I don't forget what kind it is, or I don't remember what kind it is, because most of them you can kind of get the feeling, you're like, oh, that's a sticky Washaway, I know what it looks like, but some of them do kind of look similar, and the last thing you want to do is use a Washaway when you wanted a Cutaway, or vice versa, because it's not gonna work out for your project. So I suggest always keeping those in here or labeling them somehow. I do also keep them separate in my studio storage wise, but sometimes they get, put away wrong in a rush. So keeping these in here can be really beneficial. So with the Washaways, there are also the sticky kinds. So this is really good, again, anytime you can't hoop a project, but you want that stabilizer to wash away later on. So again, this is our sticky Washaway. We do also have a Washaway that's similar to that, but is this meshy kind. And this is really good for freestanding lace, like here. So this is a project done, a freestanding lace project that has that meshiness to it. So when it washes away, all you're going to have left is just your thread, just the embroidery. So this is really good to use for that because it has a little bit more stability than some other washaways like this, which I'll talk about in just a second. This is going to give you a little bit more stability for that sort of that freestanding lace. It's really nice versus using a washaway like this. This is a washaway topper. And as you can see, it's very thin and it is a tiny bit stretchy. It basically feels like a thick saran wrap, but it washes away completely. And a topper is when you have a project, sometimes you have to use several different types of stabilizer. And anytime you're working with a like terry or a velvet or a knit, sometimes that has a little bit of a loft, you're going to want to use a topper with it. Because that is going to keep all of those stitches on top of the fibers and not sinking in between each fiber. It's going to stabilize, and because it's stabilizer, it's going to stabilize those threads, but then later wash away. So when you're embroidering towels, you want to use, like you're putting a monogram on it, you're going to want to use a sticky stabilizer to keep that towel in place, and then use a topper on top to keep those stitches nice and secure. And sometimes there are thicker and thinner versions of this, but normally these are not the best for when you're using freestanding lace. because it does, the needle sometimes punctures it a little bit too much, and if you have a really dense freestanding lace like this, it can just be too flimsy. When the embroidery machine's going in the same place a lot, it can kind of make it perforated. So using a more woven-y, not woven, but a meshy sort of more opaque fibrous stabilizer can be better for that freestanding lace. And then there is also liquid stabilizer. This is Tearaway Magic, which I've talked about probably a dozen times, and I know a lot of other educators talk about this because it's an awesome product. This is actually the old label, so it's not going to look exactly like this. I just refill this and I get the gallons. But what this does is it's a liquid stabilizer, and you spray it on the fabric, or if you want it really stiff, like you just dunk it in a little container of it, and it's going to stiffen up your fabric. Now, what I sometimes use with this, well, you can use this with decorative stitches, you can use this with fabric that is really stretchy, and you spray it on and it's going to give it a little bit more stability so it's not moving all over. There's 101 different uses for this. So that's a product I recommend just in general, even if you don't embroider. But what I sometimes do with this is I'll soak my entire piece of fabric. So this entire piece of fabric is soaked with Tearaway Magic. You can kind of see or you might be able to see the color change up here, because when you do use Tearaway Magic, it does change the color of your fabric just temporarily. When you wash it out, it will go back to its normal state. But what I'll do with this is I like to embroider, and this only works with very lightly stitched designs, so very open designs, a low count stitch design. The Sashiko designs work really well. This is a design that I digitized in Artistic Digitizer. So it is just embroidered with just the liquid stabilizer, that Tearaway Magic. It doesn't have any other stabilizer. And again, that's only going to work if it's a really lightly stitched design, but it will work really great for if you're wanting to use a project that when you're kind of making your own fabric. So this is an example of each one of these is embroidered and then cut apart and sewn back together. So you can kind of see the back, it's all embroidered. And then I made like yardage in a sense, cut it up and sewed it back together, and it doesn't have any additional stabilizer. This still has the liquid stabilizer, so I haven't washed it because it's not finished, but if I did, it would go back to its normal state. It will be a little bit stiffer than regular fabric just because there is a bunch of stitching on it. The thread itself is going to make it a little bit not quite as soft and gentle sort of feeling. It is going to have that additional thread, but that's just what embroidery is. So that's a really fun way of using a liquid stabilizer and some of those Sashiko designs that you may have in your machine that you're not quite sure what to do with. That's a really fun way of adding texture to your project without having to, use a type of fabric that is, like velvet or something that is harder to piece with. That's going to give you some cool texture without having to add a non-cotton fiber to your project. Now with the Washaway, with toppers, I wanted to show you, this is another really good example of using a topper. So this particular one was not used, well, this is an in the hoop project. It's a little stuffy, and I did it with this multicolored fur, and I actually put a little squeaker in it, so it has a dog toy in it. So my dog just poked his little head up because he's like, oh, there's a toy. But so you can make your own little dog toys, and some of these are built into some of our machines. It's in the 500E, the 550, and the CM17. And when this is done in the hoop, this fabric is a little bit thicker than just regular cotton. And when you did that last part, instead of using this thinner water solvable, I actually ended up using an OESD product called Badge Master. It's a very thick water soluble. It kind of feels like a thin vinyl. And then I put that on it a little bit more secure because the thinner one, when you've got all this extra bulk, it ended up wearing away and it wasn't enough. So that Badge Master can be really good for projects like this when you have a lot of texture and you kind of need it to, you know, lay it down into submission. But this is a really fun way of using different stabilizers, and a good example of some fun things you can make with the built-in designs that you have on your machine. We have a couple more. So lastly, we do also have, that's very similar to this Washaway topper, there is also Heataway toppers. So this is also a very thin, transparent, saran wrappy sort of stabilizer that you're going to use as a topper, again, for any kind of towels, terry, velvet, things like that that are going to, you know, you need that extra stability, but instead of washing it away, you just you just put some heat on it and it's going to disappear that way. So if you are using something, working on a project that you can't wash afterwards, but you need a topper, this is a good one for it. And again, you just put that little heat over it and it will disappear. It's really kind of fun to watch. There are also some, I wanted to briefly talk about with some of the scraps that you have with the Washaway. So this is some Washaway stabilizer. What you can do with this is you can actually put it in some water and kind of make your own spray starch or spray adhesive, or kind of make your own Tearaway magic with these scraps. Just dilute it in hot water, and then you have your own spray liquid stabilizer. So you don't have to worry about throwing these away either. This is another fun tip that you can use to reuse your stabilizer. So next I have, I did want to show you the topper, an example of the topper. So this is an Embroidery, and this actually has 3 different types of stabilizers on it. So working from the back is I used a sticky Washaway, and I did that because let's pretend this was a cardigan and I couldn't hoop it. I used that sticky Washaway to stabilize this knit so it wouldn't get all wonky when I was putting it in or when it moved. So I stabilized it with the Washaway, and then I put the softer Cutaway on top of that so that it had, that would be what's close to my skin, and it wouldn't be all scratchy. And then it also, because it's a Cutaway, it gives it that extra stability, and that mesh is again softer. And it looks a little stiff, but that's because it hasn't been washed away yet. And then I also used a topper on the top of it. So I would put my fabric down, and then I would have put my topper on top of that, and either use the basting tool on my machine to baste it into place, or you can also use embroidery tape to tape it into place if you can't stitch through the fabric itself, because it may be a project that you can't stitch through the fabric, because it may be, if it was on a cardigan, maybe it would have stitched across like where a button was, and you wouldn't want to do that because that would have messed up the machine. So using that tape can be really good too. So there's always kind of a way around what you're wanting to do. Now I did tear away that extra Washaway, but you should be able to see the difference of the color, so that the outside red is just the regular fabric. The inside here is where that Washaway still is. And again, I could either pick it off, or I could just put it in the water and it would dissolve. But you can kind of see how it has that sort of saran wrappy feel to it. So there are just 2 quick more that I want to go over. So there is also some other specialty fabric, specialty stabilizers, like this particular one. It's called Crinkle Magic. There's other brands that make this as well. And what this does is when it's stitched, it's going to just be like regular stabilizer. And then when you put heat on it, when you steam it, it's going to shrink up like a shrinky dink. I don't know if anyone else played with shrinky dinks. I love them as kids. So it's basically like a fabric version of a shrinky dink. So this is an example of something that I did with that. So what's really cool about this is, now this is something that I'm not going to be using all the time. This is not something I use on a daily basis, but for sort of specialty projects, this can be really fun for if you're wanting to create texture in something. So this is a leftover piece of a little seahorse stuffed animal that I made for work a couple years ago. Her name is Serafina. I'll show her here. So basically what I did is I created the design itself. So you may be able to see the design a little bit better on the back. So the design itself, I created in Artistic Digitizer using the array tool. And I created the design, I stitched it out, and then put the steam on it, and it shrunk up. And then I was able to cut out my pattern from there and then make the seahorse. So this is Serafina. So all of her body here is all that texturized. So it has that fun little, just a little bit more dimension to her. And then she's also embroidered along her different fins. And then there's some decorative stitches on the top. And then she actually has a whole surrounding that she goes in that I created. She's got seaweed and sea anemones and all kinds of fun stuff and like little sand. She's got a little whole environment that she lives in that I made that was really fun. But so as you can see, this is not something that you're going to use all the time, but making stuffed animals like this and making really kind of anything that you want a little bit extra texture, this can be a really fun way of adding it. And I kind of enjoy it. Again, it's not something I use all the time, but you know, for the right time, it's like exactly what you want, and it can be a really easy, and plus it's kind of fun to do. Lastly, the last stabilizer I wanted to talk about is there are actually special battings that are meant for embroidery. So some of the brands are like Battleizer, that basically it's specific batting that you can embroider on. So it has all of that stabilizer in it. So let's say you're doing a pillow and you, if you're doing a pillow and you want it to be embroidered and you want batting in it, sometimes hooping this can be really nice, or I will use a Washaway and I'll float the batting depending on how thick it is. You can then embroider on it, and then you don't have to worry about having all of this extra bulky stabilizer in your project because it's in the fibers of your batting, which can be really fun. And then there are two more things that I want to talk about. They're not actually stabilizer, but I wanted to kind of talk about embroidery and pressing it back out. So a lot of times when you get your embroidery, it may be, let's say you washed it to wash away and it's kind of, and you need to, you know, iron it out at the end. There's a couple ways you can do that. Ideally, you don't want to iron directly onto the stitches, onto the thread, because you can smash your stitches and sometimes it can change the sheen of your thread. So it's ideally don't press directly onto it. That doesn't mean it sometimes doesn't happen. It's not the end of the world, but best practices are not to directly put an iron onto it when you need to iron around it. So what I like to do is ideally you get a pressing mat, a wool pressing mat, and you can either press it face down and iron from the back this way. Sometimes you can't necessarily iron directly onto the stabilizer because sometimes the heat will melt the stabilizer. So sometimes it's better to do it the opposite way. Well, I'll do it this way. And you can actually, so you can do it either way. So you can do it this way and you don't want to necessarily put the iron directly onto the stabilizer. You get a pressing mat, pressing cloth, and you put that on top, iron it, and then let that heat sort of soak in. This also protects the fabric and protects the stabilizer. Your threads are being cushioned by the wool mat. And then after you take your iron off, you let that cool the way it is. And then once it's cool, then you can remove it and you're gonna have a flatter, beautiful stitching that way. If you don't have the mat, you can also just do it with the pressing cloth on top. Again, press it, let it cool, and then you can remove it. So that's just a little tip on how to care for your embroidery once it's been done, because sometimes when it comes out, it does need a little press because pressing always makes everything look better. So I hope this has clarified a few questions that you guys might have had with stabilizers. So I hope you guys have a fantastic day, and I will see you guys next week. Have a great one. Bye-bye.